Reviewing my video, I realized that my opening clip was a little bit loud, and so now I have to make a 55-second clip of telling you what the heck's going on. So I'm eating up some time right now. I got a beer in the conical in the clip that you're looking at, and basically what's going on is I brewed a beer, threw it into the conical, and I didn't worry about temp controlling it or anything like that. But what I did do is I hooked up my CO2 line to it, and I jacked it up to 12 psi. But that beer was sitting at about 80 degrees, and that's a really freaking hot temperature to be fermenting at. So what we're gonna find out and discover is whether or not that was a bad experiment, if the beer turns out drinkable or not. 55 seconds. This beer has been fermenting for about 18 days now, I'd say. When it started fermenting, it got up to about 10 psi, and then for about the first week it was about that, and then it started fading. It was about 5 psi for a couple days, and then it actually dropped to 0. So I've just been letting it do whatever the heck it wants to do. So we're gonna keg it today. Like I said, it's about 18 days in. Doing a nice little closed pressure transfer into the keg, and we'll get that baby carved up, and then we'll drink it. Let's keg it. I've been drinking this beer for like 3 days now. I've had like 4 pints of it. On the first time I drank it, I was like, wow, this beer is friggin' phenomenal. At the first sip, I got a little bit of like fusel alcohol, a little bit of a boozy taste, but you kind of just get slammed up front with like a tropical, fruity flavor, which I used, I kind of alternated Columbus and Delta hops. And there is some tropical citrus notes to the Delta hops. It could be that, but honestly, I think that it's just an exaggerated ale yeast ester. You know, fermenting at 80 degrees. It is, like I said, a little bit boozy, extremely fruity. You're just punched in the face with it, and I don't really think that it's bad. I mean, it's pretty young yet. It's only been in the keg for like a week, maybe a week and a half, and you know, it's really, really young. Some of this stuff could condition out, but I guess if the experiment was, can I brew a beer and ferment it at 80 degrees under pressure without any off flavors, I guess the answer would be no. And like I said, I think that so much of the tropical flavor is coming from the yeast being stressed out too, but it's not actually kind of bad. It's kind of, you know, like if you're making like a New England IPA, might be a really good idea to stress the crap out of the yeast. This is just a pale ale. Usually I brew them to like 5.5%, and so a little bit of boozy, so maybe it tastes like a 7% beer. You know, it's not really bad. I mean, this is a pretty easy drinking beer. I'm not upset with it. All right, back to this pressure fermented beer and that whole scandal. So I had my conclusions. I think that it had exaggerated yeast ester flavors, kind of minimal off flavors compared to what I was expecting, but they were there. I had my friend over who was like super sensitive to dry yeast. I mean, he can pick it out every time. It's actually quite amazing. I can't do that. but usually he can pick out the SO5, and this was SO4, and there was a little bit of that dry yeast flavor. He picked it up slightly. He said, "Oh yeah, this is a homebrew." Well, wait a second. You know, there's something funky going on here. Extremely fruity. He was picking up all that. The fascinating thing is that as the beer warmed up, he told me that it got better. He actually went and poured a second glass and just let it sit and waited, and then he drank it, which makes sense. The esters should show up more when it's warm. But I was kind of surprised that, you know, I like my beer cold. I don't care what it is. That's just programmed into my brain, and that's him too. But, you know, it's true. That beer was a lot better warmed up. So kind of hit or miss on what the conclusion of this video is. You know, is it a good thing to do or is it not a good thing to do? I think it depends on what beer style you're going to brew and what you're expecting from that beer. But yeah, maybe liquid yeast would have been better. Exaggerated flavors, minimal off flavors, though they were there. So I thought this was a very interesting little experiment, and I think that it was definitely worthy of doing, and I'm happy with it. So I'm drinking a Doppelbock right now. Cheers to you. Thanks for watching this. This was a long experiment, and I appreciate you sticking with me. One thing I want to say about fermenting under pressure, I don't know if you want to call this a disclaimer or something that's kind of cool, but you're actually kind of like I'm using my conical as almost like a bright tank. So when I put CO2 into there, it actually absorbs into the beer. So when I keg it, my beer is pretty much actually carved. The last beer that I did like this, I had it under CO2 for like a day and it was ready to serve. So just keep that in mind when you're kegging your beer, or if you're bottling your beer, you know, check and see where the carbonation is at before you start adding any sugars or priming or anything like that.